Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna say.
Let's bring on the one and only, the Tell It Like It Is guy, the news tip guy, the founder of Community Media Workshop, where he communicated with thousands of journalists and different newspapers, et cetera, to promote what nonprofits were doing. And that would be our sometimes host and one of our producers, the one and only Thom Clark. Good morning to you, Thom.
Good morning, Michael. It's great to see you.
Well, I'm glad to have you on and get, before we started, you gave me an update on all your plans. Another old guy with a lot of ambition. I love it. And I wanted to have you on because I'm not a Catholic, but you and Katie, who are my main producers and cohorts in this show, along with Lynn Arman and, of course, our engineer, Hal, you're both Catholics and both activist Catholics with a lot of knowledge and history about Catholicism in this town. And my image of a Catholic priest as a kid growing up was someone who kind of helped the poor and was on the side of the people. Maybe not only always the case, but that has been the case in the most recent Pope and the new Pope. So how about giving us a little bit on your take on Pope Leo, the new Pope Leo?
I think this was a fascinating choice made pretty quickly for anyone who has seen the movie Conclave, which was its own kind of unique story and probably nothing quite like what happened this past week or so. But we have a homegrown, though he's been gone for a long time, from Chicago, priest, bishop, cardinal, and now the Pope, Pope Leo. And he comes in the tradition of the previous Pope Leo XIII, who around the turn of the last century, after we had gone through industrialization and the robber barons and McKinley's tariffs. Do I hear an echo here? We have a new Pope Leo XIV emerge, a very learned, multilingual man of the world, who also understood the Roman bureaucracy, the curia, as we call it. And I think that's why he emerged, because Pope Francis, I think, kind of guaranteed, used an old daily move, perhaps, in packing the ballot to make sure that most of the cardinals who were voting for the next pope were, in fact, people that he, Pope Francis, appointed. And that included this guy who's been working in Rome for years, but just 2 years ago was made a cardinal. And what was his job? Vetting bishops, candidates to be bishops. So of all the 130 or 40 cardinals who voted, they probably knew him more than anyone else because they were meeting most of each other for the first time. And so I think that's why, as a practical matter, without going down too much more of this papal politics hole, we ended up with a darn good candidate, and we'll see how much he continues to echo his namesake, who really promoted worker rights. It was a challenge to the way capitalism and communism were being carried out in the early 1900s, and laid down really a very basic sort of human rights agenda, social justice agenda that many of us who would still consider ourselves Catholic have always ascribed to. So it's very exciting, and we'll see what happens.
Well, what was the vibe? I'm sure, you go to church up there in Evanston. You go to mass, I think, probably maybe you do confession. What's been the response of your cohorts to this nomination of the new pope?
Well, we're very excited and encouraged. We have a very active parish, St. John the 23rd, which is a merger of two other parishes, St. Mary's and St. Nicholas. And we are working through that merger. We are very close to both accompanying recent immigrants and refugees and migrants, as well as accepting in many bilingual and Spanish language and Haitian language, Creole, I must mention, language masses to represent the various parts of our diverse community. And so there's a lot of excitement, but also ongoing worry, because our 2 years appointed pastor is from Africa and his visa is up and he may be sent back home. His associate pastor, who's from Mexico, is probably packing his bags this July. And suddenly our merged parish is going to be without because of why? Our lack of an immigration policy. This is probably going to affect thousands of imams and rabbis and ministers and nuns. People are helping the sick. People are translating on the border. I just heard a story yesterday about nuns who have been moved out of one place and put on the border. The problem being many of the people they're encountering don't speak Spanish because they're Mayan or some other Indian tribe. So we're very close to some of these so-called border issues in our parish. I think we're excited to have a counterpart American to the current regime undergoing in D.C.
How much do you think that him being kind of opposite of the current U.S. leadership in our government, how much did that play a part? Is it a message from the rest of the world or a chunk of it about not liking what's going on over here?
I think it's a secondary motive. I think the practical one was the one I mentioned earlier. More people who were voting knew him than they knew each other. And so they were comfortable with him. They saw spirituality, they saw an intellect, they saw someone who was curious and was a good listener and could speak 5 languages. So, I think in this age, we need strong communication skills. And clearly Pope Francis had that. We'll see what Pope Leo does, but the first week or so has been very encouraging. It'll be remaining to be seen how the role of the women may be improved, how the sex abuse scandal may be finally settled, and the appropriate reparations and whatnot take place. But this is a major faith in the world, along with Muslims and Hindus and whatnot. I think we have perhaps a new leader who will be able to speak to all those other diverse audiences around the world. And for that, I'm hopeful.
I'm hopeful too, and I like how he criticized Vice President Vance, and he's really called attention again to what he thinks about immigration. So we're going to hear a lot more from him. I'm going to call people's attention to a short piece that was in the Observer, observer.co.uk, an opinion piece where the title is Intimate and Humane, Pope Leo is True Son of Chicago. I know you're a Cub fan, and the Cubs are doing better than the Sox, but I'm really glad that the new Pope is a White Sox fan.
I'm very excited too. I've always considered myself a Chicago baseball fan.
Me too.
And I grew up with a lot of night games at Comiskey Park. So my allegiances really are on both sides of town, and it's another exciting part. I want to quickly plug a sister podcast, if we will. CityCast Chicago had an excellent show interviewing Lauren Fitzpatrick of the Sun-Times about this whole Chicago Pope phenomenon. And it's a very heartfelt interview on her part as a reporter about growing up Catholic on the South Side and what it means to have gone to the same places the Pope went to get a hot dog or to watch a movie, or in fact, go to Comiskey Park. So there's a very exciting local connection, which I think transcends one's particular beliefs or faith. Culturally, this is a really critical moment that will put Chicago back in the map, and it'll be interesting to see how both the church locally as well as our communities in the region rise up to the occasion.
One more thing on Catholicism and Catholic people. How about a little bit on Jack Egan, who I know you and Katie Hogan both were friends with and fond of, and his name has come up somewhat around this the new Pope.
Well, Jack Egan probably represents the style of a priest in the street that maybe a Mike Flager represents today, amongst other people. Larry Dowling is another one that comes to mind. Folks who really brought the gospel to their heart and back out onto the streets rather than necessarily a church building. And I think the reason Jack Egan comes up, and yes, he was a very personal friend of ours, of our family. He was at all of my siblings' weddings. He kind of celebrated our wedding 50 years ago. Jack emulated a style of pastoral leadership that really put lay people front and center and used the skills of business people and housewives and school teachers, etc., to enrich how the church was practiced, administered, and led. We got a little ways with that during that era, and maybe we'll have an opportunity for that door to open a little wider now.
Tom Clark, any comments on our mayor who gave a kind of a pep talk at halftime 2 years into his administration? Any thoughts on that?
Well, he was trying to obviously reset his record to date, which is not very impressive. I'm afraid that a progressive, so-called, that we were very excited about and indeed ended up working for in many cases, has proven to be a fairly non-collaborative and therefore not very successful leader of the city at a critical time when we have huge fiscal issues. And collaboration will be critical to solving them. One interesting side issue that's emerged, I think, because of his administration's ineptness, is a much stronger city council. Now, it's not very unified yet, but I think it's healthy for democracy to have a more independent city council, and that's one thing I think is emerging from this current administration.
One of the things about you, Tom, is you like to focus not only on the global, but on the local, as well as surviving in the city, with getting reliable news, encouraging people to take action where and when they can. How about what's your take on Rogers Park these days? What's your take on surviving the city in these difficult and trying times?
Well, my wife and I, Jean Bryan, are coming up on 35 years as homeowners in this wonderful neighborhood. And there's a part of us that doesn't want to promote it too much because that'll just raise rents and our property taxes and create even more parking problems. But I first lived here in 1971 in an apartment north of Howard, and there was always parking shortages in this neighborhood. It's intended as a walking neighborhood, and I think we've been able to sort of maintain some of that feel. Don't tell anyone, shh, but you can walk off your back apartment porch onto a beach in our neighborhood. You can't do that anywhere else until you get to South Shore, going from north to south. There are parking lots and expressways and all sorts of things in the way to actually be able to do that. And it's just a marvelous thing. And of course, our big celebration around the lakefront is Artists of the Wall that comes up in June. We have, other art stuff going on all summer, from Pride North to the Glenwood Arts Festival, a free community, 2-day music, artisans, great food. We have a lot to look forward to in the neighborhood of the Republic of Rogers Park. And, we may have to be doing more and more stuff with each other to survive what we're going through as a country these next few months and years.
Now, I know you have ducks at your house, but you also are a bird fan, bird watcher. What do you got on the plovers and any other bird-related stuff, and how are your ducks doing?
Well, we have a direct line to volunteers who have regular shifts over at Montrose to keep track of the plovers. I haven't gotten my report today yet, but there seem to be maybe 2 or 3 birds, maybe 4 showing up that have been here previously, at least 2 generations worth. It's very exciting because it's a reestablished part of dune land, much like we have on our frontage of Rogers Park around Greenleaf Pier. It's amazing what volunteers have created there, along with that huge nature preserve just north of the pier at Pratt. I want to mention one other nature preserve, which is the West Ridge Nature Preserve at Peterson and Ridge. A must-go-to place at any time of the year if you want to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Yes, Western Avenue is rushing by and Peterson is rushing by, but inside that preserve is just a wonderful pond and a children's playground, and you can often see deer through the fencing to the cemetery. It's just a wonderful spot.
What else is going on in our neighborhood or beyond in the city that you think people should know about?
Well, I find it curious that the life preservers that our neighbors got installed after at least a year-long battle with the Park District. Some neighbors took to themselves installing life preservers after we had a tragic drowning. Well, part of that building up of the sand dune, by the way, the largest beach I've seen in 15 years, I think we'll be enjoying this summer with maybe a double sandbar, which doesn't always happen on this side of the lake. But those newly installed, I think just 2 years ago, orange life preservers are almost buried up to the rings. That's how much the sand has built up around the volunteer planted dune grass in front of the playground and by the old cafe. The old cafe's had to dig itself out to have a walkway around the windows this summer.
You're talking about the former Heartland Stand in the Sand, which is now called Bluebird or something?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a great spot. They've done a great job.
Great spot, and those folks have really fixed it up, and they seem to have overcome some of the challenges with the Park District leasing process, and are looking forward as soon as it warms up. Maybe this weekend, they might be open, and we'll see what happens.
Thom, you, in addition to observing what's going on here in the neighborhood, you also are participating in an investigative project called the Investigative Project on Race and Equity. And you've been on the show talking about it before, but it's also something you just got some rewarding you with an award. Tell us a little bit about the Project on Race and Equity.
I'm a private volunteer and co-founder of this organization. Probably one of the best things I've done since retirement. This young group of journalists has just won for several stories they did last year, the coveted Peter A. Lisagor Award. We won 3 of them, 3 out of 4 that we were nominated for. It was very exciting to see these young journalists be honored by their peers. This is a peer-judged competition, which makes it a very potent recognition that this young organization is really producing in a collaborative way important journalism that other news outlets want to pick up on and co-publish with us. And so we've also developed a very interesting journalism model in this time of ever-shifting media landscape, and are training the next generation of data-driven investigative journalists. It's very, very exciting.
Tell me a little bit about what you've discovered in that project. What are some of the highlights?
Well, one of the stories that got attention was the difficulty Black homeowners in particular have in getting home improvement loans to fix the roof in the home they've lived in for 30 years because their neighborhood was a formerly red line, formerly affected by housing covenants in the history of Chicago's discriminatory housing development. And we disclose how tough it is, particularly if you're a homeowner on the west or south side, to get a loan to replace your roof. We're hoping this kind of investigation will lead to changes in public policy. An earlier story we did on police traffic stops has already led to legislation being proposed in the Illinois General Assembly. So what we try to find through public record seeking is data points that will help back up the stories we're hearing from people in neighborhoods like Englewood, where some of these stories in particular emanated from. And it's just very exciting to see the next generation take on these kind of topics and find an outlet where their investigative work can finally be seen.
One of the things you raised with me was where do people get good information these days? And I'm not sure what papers people are reading, what you suggest. I could go into what I look at, but what are you looking at, and where do you think people should go?
We still get a paper Sun-Times delivered every morning on our front porch. I read it cover to cover. It doesn't take as long, unfortunately, because it's shorter and thinner. but I think it's important to support local journalism. I read Charlie Myers in Chicago Public Square every day, 10:04 a.m. It's out there with all the headlines pertinent to Chicago everywhere you go. I'm not a big podcaster, but I check out not only Live from the Heartland, but if I haven't seen it when it's broadcast or listened to it, but also CityCast Chicago that I mentioned earlier, I think is a really bright, intended for a younger audience, Michael. I got to warn you about that. But it's a very entertaining 20 minutes or so of Chicago-oriented topics of the news, public policy, culture, arts. It's really CityCast Chicago, a very good place to go.
Well, I had the honor this week of going to my son Katie and his fiancee Gina's announcement that they were getting married. And I got to say, there's a lot of musicians there, Twin Peaks and Whitney and, Nolan Shannon used to work on our show, runs the Constellation Room. I ran into a lot of young people there, and I've invited them to come on the show. So
wonderful.
Hopefully we'll have a lineup. Now, the last thing, I've got about 20 seconds. There's 1 million people vying for Dick Durbin's seat here in Illinois. I know we weren't going on politics, but you got any little lean or any information?
It's going to be at Donnybrook, both the Senate race, and which doesn't come around very often, and Jan Schakowsky's seat. And there are already some really good candidates for her seat in particular. I can't say what's going to happen on the Senate side. I understand Durbin staying out of the endorsement process at this point. And I'm not even sure I want to believe that money will be the main difference. I really would like to see a full-blown debate, see who presents himself the best. Illinois is a very diverse state. It's not just Chicago. Dick Durbin, who's from downstate, all sorts of interesting dynamics about the Senate seat.
Well, we'll be talking about that over and over in the next couple of years, I'm sure. Thom Clark, I want to thank you for coming on Live from the Heartland. It's always good to be with you again. I missed driving downtown with you before the show when we did it from the WLUW studios. It's kind of fun doing it in my own living room these days. I'll see you soon, brother.